Okay, so we've gone through 2 of these subtypes of depression. The third one that I wanted to talk about is postpartum major depression. Postpartum, this is a funny story. I hope the guy that said this won't watch this tape. He's not here tonight, so it's good. But I was mentioning to somebody I was going to talk about postpartum depression tonight, and he says, "You know, I had that one time." And I said, "Well, I'm pretty sure you didn't have that. I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure you didn't." And he was really thinking of a different disorder, but I think he got his disorders confused. So, yeah, obviously postpartum depression means that and I'll give you, and we'll do a case here in a second, but it means that it has to be a woman, because it's somebody who's delivered a baby and gets depressed within 4 weeks of delivering that baby. So most of the time, men, for all you men out there watching the tape or whatever, you're not going to be eligible for this one. So just listen for your spouse's sake. Let's put it that way. So let me give you an example, or a case example of postpartum depression. This one is a young female who delivers her first child without complications and is in tears almost immediately. She had no prior depression or a history of depression. So in other words, while she was pregnant, there wasn't any depression that the doctors knew about or that she could tell. And she'd not had a history of being depressed before. But this was her first child, remember, okay? So she's not interested in the infant now, and she doesn't really want to eat. She's not sleeping well, and she starts to become, interestingly, I think, did I say earlier about psychosis, that losing sleep is really a big risk factor for psychosis. So if you, really any of us in this room, if you told us, if you forced us not to sleep, there'd be some point where we'd get psychotic, all of us, even if you don't have a history of that before. We'd all be susceptible to that. So losing sleep is kind of a key, and also you should remember that when it comes to treating these things, because that's the first thing you got to do to help with psychosis, is get the person a good night's sleep. So this woman, she starts not sleeping well, and she becomes obsessed that her child is possessed by the devil. I don't know why I got such a religious theme here tonight. I guess because a lot of times psychosis does have a religious theme. For some reason, I don't know why that is, but there is a lot of religiosity to psychosis. But she becomes, she starts becoming convinced that she's got to take this child's life to save the world. And if she doesn't, this child will become, maybe the Antichrist or something, and take over the world. So this sounds bizarre to everyone out there, I'm sure. But this is real stuff. I mean, this stuff really happens. And the reason I bring this case up is because in the media, occasionally, there are these tragedies that we read about and hear about, where a woman will do that. She will take the life of her newborn child or her infant, okay? And we all stand back aghast and go, how could you do something like that, okay? We can't relate to something like that because we haven't been psychotic, okay? When I say psychotic, remember I said this is something that the person believes is absolutely true. And it's also something that is very stuck on their minds. They can't get it off their mind. It's a broken record all the time. All they think about is this child is possessed by the devil. I've got to kill it or it's going to take over the world. That is, that sounds weird to the rest of us, but that thought can cause a person to do something like this. So in this case, we're talking about a person who not only had, I want to make sure you understand that not every case of postpartum depression has psychosis with it. Okay, I just use this as an example because I wanted to discuss some of the stuff that you see in the media sometimes. But not every case does. You remember the whole thing with was it Brooke Shields, I think, and Tom Cruise, right? And they were going back, they were kind of bantering back and forth. Brooke Shields had suffered from postpartum depression. To my knowledge, it wasn't any psychotic depression. It was just postpartum depression. But she took treatment for it, and Tom Cruise kind of criticized her for that. So she was an example of somebody who had postpartum depression without any psychosis. In most cases, it's more rare to have the psychosis, but I just wanted to make sure you realize that it's possible, and this is what sometimes happens in some of these cases that you see in the media. Well, what is postpartum depression? It's a depressive episode with a lot of the same symptoms that we talked about earlier for depression, depressed mood and all that, and it has to occur within 4 weeks of delivering a baby. It occurs in about 1 in 500 to 1 in 1,000 deliveries. And it may be more common in new mothers. Remember this case, this was the first baby that she delivered. Again, the symptoms can be the same basically they are the same as a major depressive episode. So it's all the same, the guilt, the worthlessness, the changes in energy, sleep, appetite, all these things, and sometimes even suicidal thoughts. if the person does get psychotic with it, what you see a lot of times is that it involves the baby in some way. So like in this case, for instance, that the mother becomes convinced that the baby is possessed by the devil. Another thing that can happen is sometimes the mother will be convinced that the baby has special powers of some type. So the obsessions, this feeling like there's something wrong with this baby, or there's some possession or something like that. That's what can end up in the mother taking the baby's life. Now you might be wondering, you might be thinking about baby blues. I mean, have you ever heard of baby blues? People, what is the difference between postpartum depression and baby blues? And you might be wondering that. Well, baby blues is something that lasts about 3 to 7 days. It can be tearfulness and some of the same symptoms. Usually doesn't interfere with function as bad, and is not as severe, of course. Okay, but it's more common. It's more common than full-blown postpartum depression. The other risk, I guess, the other big thing, even if a woman doesn't get psychotic with the postpartum depression, the other problem is that, as you know, when you first deliver a baby, bonding is kind of a big deal for that infant, for development, right? So if the mom is very depressed and doesn't want anything to do with the child, and is very negative about everything, and really is so caught up in her own depression that she can't focus on the child, that's going to interfere with raising that child. And if there's nobody else to step in, that whole bonding process may not occur, and that's a problem for child development. So you definitely want to take this seriously and treat it or bring your loved one to treatment if you notice this occurring. And also step in and try to help out with the baby, because that's kind of important. Sleep is an issue. We sort of talked about that. A lot of times these mothers, they feel extremely guilty because they know, on some level they know that they're supposed to be taking care of this infant. And they feel so guilty that they're not, and they don't feel like it. And they feel like there's something wrong with me. I can't, so they feel ashamed, I guess. They may not even talk to anyone about this. So it may be something you have to kind of observe, because they may be too ashamed to say anything about it. The thing to keep in mind, too, is that once a woman, like let's say she's had one baby and she gets postpartum depression, with the next delivery, that's another high-risk period. In general, what I tend to think of is that whenever a woman has an episode of depression or any psychiatric illness that we think is related hormonally somehow to some dramatic change in her hormone level, that really you need to be aware of, you need to be alert for any kind of recurrence of that type of psychiatric illness anytime there's any huge hormone change. So if a woman has postpartum depression, for instance, you got to watch for premenstrual dysphoric stuff, premenstrual depression. Okay, you also need to watch for depression if they were to have a hysterectomy or go through menopause. So any kind of menopause may not be so bad because it's the hormones at that point sort of sputter. They kind of sputter and do this kind of thing and go down over time. Whereas with a hysterectomy, it's boom, And with child delivery, it's the same thing. It's a dramatic change. So you got to be aware. And there are some doctors who, if a woman has an episode of postpartum depression, and then gets through that, and then has another pregnancy and gets ready to deliver, a lot of times the pregnancy itself is protective against the depression, which is kind of interesting. Probably again hormonal. But as soon as she delivers, a lot of times the doctors then will start a medicine, whatever it was that helped her before, start that back again immediately to get it in her system and going right away, so that hopefully she doesn't have the same issue. Some doctors, and it's a risk-benefit thing, but some doctors will even start at the 3rd trimester, start the medicine, treat the 3rd trimester all the way through the delivery to get them through that, to get the woman through that risk period. Because as you know, or you may know, the antidepressant medicines take a while to work. They take, like I said, 4 to 6 weeks. If you started right after she delivers, 4 to 6 weeks is a long time for that to kick in, and she may get pretty depressed in between. Now, anytime you use medicine in pregnancy, there's some risk involved in that, okay? So, some people think, the risk is higher when the brain is developing in the 1st trimester. Maybe, okay, and I don't know that you can say that there's no risk for sure in the 3rd trimester. So anytime there's a decision about treating a woman with medication while she